So today we're going to talk about Adobe ahead of their earnings, right? And over the past couple of years, Adobe has done a really great job of transitioning itself into a software as a service company, and they really dominate the market of graphic design, video editing, photography, and all of those really technological advances, right? And so Megan, I'm wondering if Adobe is still the dominant company in this market, or are you seeing consumer sentiment say otherwise?
No, whenever we look at Adobe, the way that they've been able to capitalize on these subscription models and expand their cloud offerings and, continue to grow new subscriptions is really impressive. When we look at our year-over-year growth, we're tracking people talking about downloading, whether they're downloading Photoshop, whether they're using, a document editor, a PDF editor, or something of that nature. We're tracking those downloads, those usage mentions, and in general, you can see it's very, very in line with the stock. Right now for us, year over year and quarter over quarter purchase intent is pretty flat. That's not to say that there's no growth. That just is to say that, they're maintaining previous levels of growth. I believe last quarter they reported about 22% year over year growth, at least in the digital media arena, which is what we particularly have insight into, right? So I think that essentially we don't really have an edge in terms of, our data looks great and the stock is pulled back, or our data looks horrible and, the stock is up, but it looks priced pretty fairly.
Megan, this company gets 90% of their revenue from what you just said, subscriptions, right? So yes, that's kind of stable and kind of predictable. And there's not a lot of play in these numbers. And I think investors like that, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. I think another interesting element, they've been recently pushing these different mobile subscriptions. You have a lot more a la carte options. I know, just as an example, my little sister, she's in nursing school, but she has a $10 a month subscription to Adobe Lightroom so that she can make Instagram presets, which I didn't even know was a thing. But apparently, they're bringing in people and capturing new subscriptions in places that, aren't necessarily a creative field.
Yeah, I mean, going off of Kevin's point too, the visibility of their cash flow, I think, has really been kind of the whole software as a service space has really gotten bid up quite a bit over the last 2 or 3 years, as you can see on your chart as well. But yeah, I mean, the first thing you said is the predictability of your data seems to really be pretty strong in this name, and maybe that has to do with the fact that the visibility of these subscriptions and going in, you can actually translate this pretty well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that one area that they're growing in terms of, they also market a experience cloud. So this is more for advertising managers. You have analytics, you have actual placeability and things that these professionals are using that may not be as consumer facing as the Photoshops of the world. But that segment, I believe they reported, grew 34% year over year. So that's a potential growth that we're not necessarily measuring that could, they could report upon and continue to develop.
So growth is a really big part about this company, and I'm not talking revenue growth. I'm talking about growing its user base and really expanding who uses these products. You were talking about using Instagram as a non-professional way, but they do access those professionals and individuals. They also have a lot of college contracts and company contracts, as well as students. And our first tweet from Arthur sort of talks about how they're continuing to even expand on that. He says, Adobe continues to leverage its AI capabilities to build products for new audiences and implement new tools. Adobe Fresco will accomplish the following: expand their addressable market to the 5 to 10 million sculptors, painters, and drawers worldwide. Adobe Fresco is the newly announced name to what they had as their Project Gemini, which is a part of the iPad art app. So it's great. It has all these different types of paintbrushes, and they pre-released it to some artists who on Twitter were showing what they could do with the tool, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, to me, go ahead, Megan.
Oh no, that's definitely something we're watching moving forward. I think that their mobile capabilities and even the iPad capabilities, being able to use something like that seems much more portable is promising for them.
I'm not a sculptor, a painter, or a drawer. I just want that full disclosure there.
I'm not
none of
either, but
those.
the one thing I've said about Adobe in particular is it's really that the big player in this cloud space that a lot of times gets lumped in with like a Salesforce and some of these other names, but they're really in a niche that can exist with these other companies pretty much without any type of competition, given that their niche is this creative space. So whether or not you're going to these other cloud companies, you're still going to have a need for the products that Adobe has.
Right, definitely. I went to school for broadcast journalism, right? And I would use Adobe Premiere in order to package all of my reports together, package my pieces. And I mean, you would look around just the communication department at DePaul, shout out, and people would be using Photoshop, Illustrator, Audition. I mean, Adobe is really pervasive. But to your point about how in the software as a service space that they really are dominant, our next tweet says, here's Adobe's chart with a 7-day pre-earnings tool. The past year, results were 3 and 1. The chart shows the past year prior to earnings, Adobe was down 4 times, 7 days to earnings. Yet this trade still won 75% of the time. I'll take my chances. And I know that this is more of a technical tweet, but I think it really speaks to the big shoes that this company has to fill, its own big shoes based on its strong growth in the past. Can this earnings report continue to be strong?
Let's put this in the most simple way that we can here for our viewers. They've beat the last 8 quarters on their earnings expectations. End of story. So if you're going to play Adobe, which is I think 10 to 12% off its high, it's beat the last 8 quarters.
Yeah, and Megan, the only thing I would have to ask you on this is that the one thing I do notice on your consumer purchase intent mentions is there was a gap in terms of how high up those purchase intentions were, several years back relative to where they are now, where it almost looks like the stock price has kind of caught up to the growth in terms of that consumer purchase intent mention growth. Which these stocks have been priced off their ability to grow, not necessarily their ability to meet and beat expectations. It's been such a forward-looking story with all of these companies. Is that a little bit of a concern?
Absolutely, and I think that's part of the reason why, bringing Adobe to the table today, we don't feel like we have any type of significant edge because it is priced pretty accurately in terms of our purchase intent levels. Sentiment remains strong. I think it's almost at 80%, which obviously people love these products. So there's no signs of weakness per se, but there's no signs of any type of groundbreaking, earnings crushing that we think will happen.
Real quick here, Megan, we got only just a couple minutes left, but I have a question follow-up. When you see information like this, and of course your information attempts to predict, but it's not 100% accurate as we know, but when you see it's basically in line, a lot of times does that correspond to kind of in-line results, which then maybe bring kind of muted movement in terms of stock price?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because last quarter, they beat on revenue, and I think the stock actually dropped about 1% due to light guidance or perceived light guidance. So, this one it's going to be an interesting one to watch. We think that, they're maintaining those growth levels, but, we'll just see what the market, how they interpret their release.